Brisbane, Australia plays host to the annual G20 summit. With me is Brendon O'Connor, a policy expert with the US Studies Centre in Sydney, Australia. Many of these nations have tried lower interest rates and higher government spending to stimulate growth. In many cases, it hasn't really worked. What's left for them to do?
I think infrastructure spending is what the IMF is suggesting. I mean, this is a sort of interesting turnabout. This organisation, known for promoting deregulation, for liberalisation, has gone back to what you might see as an older style, a kind of Keynesian style approach. One of their big ideas in there is more infrastructure spending. So not on frivolous things, but transportation, roading.
The G20 summit was originally established in 2008 to deal with issues surrounding the financial crisis and the integrity of global financial systems. Tax reform and financial regulation are still on the agenda here, but are they still on track?
Well, I think tax reform regarding very wealthy individuals not paying tax around the globe has really improved. You know, the last 5 years of changes that people couldn't have imagined have occurred in that area. Companies, that's much more difficult. They have, fundraising capacities. They put pressure on governments. So tracking down companies that are cheating the sort of global tax system is a big item, an important item, but one that's difficult to solve. Regulation of global financial markets is more difficult because on one hand people know what happened in 2008, on the other hand people talk about over-regulation at a domestic level pretty regularly these days. So that's, I think, where a lot hasn't happened, and there's people who are doomsayers saying, look, we haven't really patched up entirely the problems that occurred in a dramatic way in 2008.
We have the main summit, but on the sidelines there's meetings happening throughout the weekend. China and the US have trade pacts in play and have just agreed some groundbreaking technology and climate deals. Where does the host nation Australia sit in all of this?
I think this is really interesting. I mean, Australia's long argued that it can't dramatically go ahead with climate reform policy, particularly our current government, the Abbott government, and then previously the Howard government, unless the big players come to the town and play their role. Now, if China's finally going to set a sort of an upper limit and work towards it, it's harder to make that argument. So I think there's been a want with the Abbott government to keep climate issues a little bit off the G20 agenda. I think this brings it to the centre of the agenda, and it raises this very difficult issue of climate reform and growth targets aren't necessarily compatible. These things in some ways run in different directions. They're competitive against each other, or they have sort of plus and minuses against each other. So I think that needs to be resolved, and I think at least Obama is one of the few leaders who's probably put that on the table. Abbott, I think, would be a little more uncomfortable with that kind of debate.
Thanks, Brendon.
My pleasure.